Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Donald Trump is on attack mode. His target is the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump is calling him names and blaming him for starting the war. And Elon Musk has joined the tirade. He's pulled out an old photo shoot of Zelensky, the one with the Vogue magazine. Musk says Zelensky was busy clicking pictures when Ukrainians were dying. What explains this offensive? Is it a pressure tactic or just old-fashioned bullying? We'll discuss that. Meanwhile, Europe, shocked by Trump's actions, is working on a secret, now not so secret plan, a plan to send troops to Ukraine. Here in India, the row over election interference is heating up. Political parties are trading accusations, but who is really trying to pull the strings from behind? We'll tell you that. Back in Europe, Germany will vote on Sunday in an election that could define the country's future. We'll explain. Also in focus, does India even need Starlink? Why have French troops left their last base in the Ivory Coast? What's the hostage mix-up that is threatening the fragile Gaza ceasefire? Will Pope Francis resign due to poor health? And should parents bring their children to work? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. India and Pakistan hold a flag meeting along the line of control. It took place in Jammu and Kashmir's Poonch district. The meeting was held after a spike in cross-border firings. During the talks, both sides agreed to honor the ceasefire agreement. Border violations have been rare since India and Pakistan renewed the agreement in 2021. Iran to conduct naval drills in the Gulf of Oman on Saturday. Since Donald Trump returned to the White House, Tehran has ramped up its displays of force through military exercises. In recent weeks, Iran has conducted such exercises across the country, including near nuclear facilities. The Sudan's army-backed government recalls its ambassador from Kenya. This is in protest over Nairobi's hosting its paramilitary rivals, who are preparing to establish a separate administration. Kenya claims it's trying to act as a mediator between the two warring sides. Italy's competition watchdog says it is investigating 4 electric vehicle makers. This includes Elon Musk's Tesla, China's BYD, and Volkswagen. The European subsidiaries of these automakers are under scrutiny over alleged unfair commercial practices. And France to deploy police at schools to spot check bags. There will be random searches for knives and other weapons concealed in school bags. The education minister says recent stabbing incidents have prompted this move.
I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job.
We knew President Trump would have a difficult equation with Ukraine, but this bad, I don't think anyone predicted it. Here is a list of things that Trump has said about Zelensky, and I'm just counting the last 2 days. A dictator without election, a terrible leader, and a modestly successful comedian. This is not criticism. This is an all-out attack, and Zelensky will be haunted by it. Last year, he was dealing with good old Joe Biden. No criticism, no questions, no insults. But Trump is unleashing on him. He is effectively blaming Ukraine for starting the war. Listen to the contrast.
This guy has to his very soul is who he says he is. It's clear who he is. He's willing to give his life for his country. And all the folks that came with him today.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast, because I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions of people have unnecessarily died.
And there's no let-up. Trump's allies and advisors are also joining in. Look at Elon Musk's post. He says Ukrainians despise Zelensky. He also pulled out an old Vogue photo shoot. Musk says Zelensky was clicking pictures while Ukrainians were getting killed. Trump's national security advisor also trained his guns. He had two messages for Zelensky. First, Trump is losing patience with you. And second, sign the mineral deal. Listen in.
Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table. Our own Secretary of Treasury personally made the trip to offer the Ukrainians what can only be described as a historic opportunity. That is for America to co-invest with Ukraine in their minerals, in their resources, to truly grow the pie. You know, rather than enter into some constructive conversations about what that deal should be going forward, we got a lot of rhetoric in the media that was incredibly unfortunate.
And what deal is that? Trump had earlier proposed a barter. Ukraine gives up its trillion-dollar mineral wealth, specifically 50% of it. And what will they get in return? Well, that part does not have a lot of clarity. Some reports say Trump promised military aid. Others say it is compensation for the aid already given. And a few reports also say it is for U.S. security guarantees, basically a post-war commitment. Trump officials met Zelensky in Munich to discuss this plan. They say he agreed to sign it, but later in public, Zelensky said no. He said the deal does not serve Ukraine's interests. Yet, Trump is not giving up. He is putting pressure on Ukraine at global forums as well. Monday marks 3 years of Russia's invasion. And to mark it, countries are drafting a UN General Assembly resolution. Around 50 countries, they're co-sponsoring this resolution, but reports say that the US has refused so far. Why? Because the resolution condemns Russian aggression. Washington is doing the same at the G7, the group of 7. They're planning a call on Monday, but there is no consensus on the joint statement. Again, the issue is the use of the term Russian aggression. Reports say Trump wants it removed from the draft. He's also considering sanctions relief for Russia. All these actions raise a couple of questions. Number one, why is Trump attacking Ukraine? I mean, it's one thing to push for a peace deal. It's entirely different to put the blame on Zelensky. And number two, how is Zelensky responding? Some Trump allies see a method to the madness. They say it is a pressure tactic, that Trump is looking to shock the Europeans into action. And if that's the idea, it has worked partially. Europe has held 2 emergency summits. A few countries have also agreed to deploy soldiers in Ukraine. It could also be a tactic to arm twist Kyiv, both for peace talks and for the mineral deal. Right now, Zelensky is saying no to both. But if he sees Trump cutting a deal with Putin, he may change his stance. He may agree to come to the table. That's a possible logical explanation to Trump's attacks. Or maybe he just does not like Zelensky. You see, Trump and Zelensky share a tricky past. In 2019, both of them had an official phone call. And during this call, Trump asked Zelensky to investigate Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden. Hunter had some business dealings in Ukraine, so Trump, who was president then, he wanted to get some dirt on Hunter Biden. But the whole thing backfired, and Trump ended up being impeached for that call. It was seen as abuse of power. Once he left office, things became worse. Trump kept saying that he could end the war in 24 hours. Zelensky clapped back. He said Trump does not understand the conflict. So my point is, there is enough bad blood here, certainly enough for a classic Trump revenge story. Which brings us to our second question. How is Zelensky reacting to all of this? He hosted Trump's special envoy yesterday. His name is Keith Kellogg. Zelensky and Kellogg were slated to hold a press conference, but they cancelled it at the last moment. In public, Zelensky is still hopeful, though. He says Ukraine needs strong agreements with the US.
We need strong agreements with the United States, agreements that will truly work. I gave instructions to work swiftly and very sensibly. Economy and security must always go hand in hand, and the details of the agreements matter. The better they are structured, the greater the results.
Now, it's not clear what Zelensky told Kellogg. Did he agree to the mineral deal? Did he offer a counter deal? Or did he reject it again? We'll know once Kellogg is back in America. But whatever happens, one thing is quite clear. Zelensky does not have a friend in the White House. In fact, he's pretty close to having an enemy.
I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job.
He is the elected president of a free system. It is very clear to me that the Ukrainian president is a democratically elected president.
So Trump has declared war on Zelensky. Ukraine's president is trapped. There is no easy way out. He can either accept a bad deal from the US or reach out to Europe for help. Because, unlike Trump, European leaders do not question Zelensky's legitimacy.
He is the elected president of a free system. This is not the case of Vladimir Putin, who kills his opponents. He prevailed against his competitors, and there was a very clear, unequivocal vote by the citizens of Ukraine.
But Zelensky needs more than words. He needs weapons or some kind of diplomatic leverage over Russia. Can Europe step up to defend Ukraine? Can Brussels take control of its own defenses? Just a few weeks ago, this seemed unthinkable. For decades, European and American defenses have been inseparable. But as Trump intensified his attacks on Zelensky, Europe began working on a plan to deploy troops to Ukraine and take matters in their own hands. The details remain scarce, but France and the UK are leading this effort. They're conducting assessments. They're exploring what a potential peacekeeping mission could look like. It's too early to put a number to this. Everything hinges basically on the terms of the peace deal. If Russia and Ukraine end the war on favorable terms, a small European force should be enough. But as things stand today, that kind of deal seems unlikely, especially if Trump continues to dismiss Ukraine's concerns, in which case Europe may consider a larger deployment, complete with air power, drones, and air and missile defense systems. Basically a full-scale military deployment with 30,000 to 40,000 troops. Many experts have quoted this number. However, neither the UK nor France have confirmed this, and they're unlikely to discuss it in public. Reports say they do not want to show their hand to Russia, although Moscow is already issuing warnings.
We are certainly following all these reports most closely. We are following all the sometimes contradictory official statements of the Europeans on this matter. This is a matter of our concern because we are talking about the possible eventual sending of military contingents of NATO countries to Ukraine.
Russia rejects any European peacekeeping mission. Their foreign minister Sergei Lavrov has taken it a step further. He has issued a warning. Lavrov says such deployment is a direct threat to Russia, even if the troops serve under a different flag. Moscow has demanded an assurance from the US on this. It is their precondition for any peace deal on Ukraine. Basically, Russia wants to know what's going on, and it wants no Western peacekeepers in Ukraine. So the US has sought clarity on this from Europe. A few days back, they sent a questionnaire to Brussels. They want the specifics about potential European deployments. And listen to the questions that they asked. Would your country be willing to deploy its troops to Ukraine as part of a peace settlement? How and where would these forces be deployed, and for how long? What actions do the US allies and partners need to be prepared to take if Russia attacks these forces? This is part of the list of questions they sent, so America wants to know what the European plan really entails. And this could come up for discussion when two European leaders travel to Washington, D.C. next week, French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Macron will meet Trump on Monday, Starmer on Thursday. Both France and the UK are developing this European deterrence plan together, and Macron says he wants to try changing Trump's mind.
I'm going to tell him that he can't be weak in the face of Putin when he'll have to face China next. That's not you. It's not your trademark. It's not in your interest. It would be a huge strategic mistake.
Expect Starmer to adopt a similar tone. Throughout this crisis, Starmer has been a hawk. He was among the first to confirm his readiness to send troops to Ukraine. Now his foreign secretary is urging other European powers to step up. They want Europe to take greater responsibility for its defenses.
It's existential for Europe to increase, of course, defence spending, to step up our commitment to our own defences across Europe.
The NATO chief is making the same demand. That's Mark Rutte. He has sent a clear message to all NATO members. Each one of them is required to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. That is the rule. But some countries fall short every year. They do not spend up to 2% of their GDP on defenses. Now, Rutte wants them to step up.
I'm happy that now 23 countries are spending the agreed 2%. But it's also true that there are still a few countries not spending 2%. I tell them, if you do not react to my phone calls, you might get phone calls from a very nice man in Washington who might be less, well, let's say, having less of a time, has more time limit, I guess, on what he wants to achieve.
No prizes for guessing. Rutte is referring to Donald Trump here. Trump has shaken up the entire continent. The NATO chief's statements also highlight the bloc's biggest weakness, their internal divisions, their difference of opinion. Not everyone in Europe wants to send troops to Ukraine, and these differences were on full display this week when Paris hosted 2 emergency summits. Countries like Italy and Germany were reluctant to deploy their militaries, so Macron, Starmer and Rutte may step in as consensus builders. They will try to persuade their counterparts, convince them to change their minds, ideally before they face Trump next week.
I have made the decision of a military operation.
Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly.
Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
In the United States, they've got a new FBI director. His name is Kashyap Patel, popularly known as Kash Patel. He will become the 9th director of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, usually FBI director appointments are a breeze. They're confirmed by a majority of votes. But Kash Patel's appointment was controversial, and that's because of his old statements. He said he wants to dismantle the FBI and take the agency out of Washington. Critics say he will make it a Trump-controlled bureau. But Kash Patel has rubbished all of this. He says his job is to restore trust in the bureau. Our next report tells you more.
And just like that, with a Bollywood twist, Kash Patel has been confirmed as the new director of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He becomes the 9th director of the bureau, confirmed by a razor-thin margin in the Senate.
Kash Patel of Nevada to be director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
The staunch Trump loyalist now takes charge of the very institution that he once vowed to dismantle. Kash, or Kashyap Pramod Patel, was born to Gujarati parents in New York. He was raised as a Hindu. In his memoir, Kash says he grew up apolitical. But in college, he became more right-wing. In 2005, he got a law degree from Pace University. For 9 years, he worked as a public defender in Florida. In 2014, he joined the Department of Justice, setting the stage for a career that would take him to the highest levels of power. During Trump's first term, Kash Patel quickly became a key player. He advised the Director of National Intelligence, then rose to become the Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense. Even after Trump's term ended, Kash Patel remained loyal. He wrote 2 children's books talking about how Trump was cheated in the 2020 polls. He's also on the board of the Trump Media Technology Group, the company behind Truth Social, which is Trump's social media platform. But there's another book of his that has made a lot of noise. It's called Government Gangsters. In this book, Patel suggested limiting the authority of the FBI, firing the top ranks, moving the headquarters out of Washington, and reducing the General Counsel's office within the FBI. He also wants to go after the so-called deep state, calling it the most dangerous threat to democracy, which made his appointment controversial. That set the stage for intense grilling during his Senate confirmation hearing. But Kash says his previous comments were taken out of context. He believes that the FBI has lost trust and he aims to restore it.
Due process must be provided without bias to all Americans. And if we cannot provide due process to the worst, then there can be no due process for anyone. And our constitutional republic fails.
The FBI has around 37,000 employees, including 13,700 special agents. It also has 350 satellite offices and over 60 foreign offices in 200 countries. Usually, the FBI is an institution above political influence. But critics believe Kash Patel's appointment makes it a Trump-controlled bureau, which is why he was confirmed by a very narrow margin. The Senate voted 51-49 to confirm. To put it in context, the last few FBI directors were confirmed by at least 90 votes.
And at the same time, the FBI has lost the trust of many Americans who fear the agency has become politicized. This President Kash Patel has spent his career working in criminal law and national security.
So the biggest challenge for Kash Patel will be proving that he can lead the FBI impartially. The agency's legitimacy relies on public perception. If he is seen targeting political opponents or dismantling key investigative functions, he risks eroding confidence in the bureau. Meanwhile, his focus is on curbing bureaucratic inefficiencies, which may lead to a more streamlined and effective agency. So, Kash Patel's tenure is said to be one of the most closely watched in the bureau's history.
Here in India, the big story is foreign meddling. Are foreign players interfering in Indian affairs, especially our elections? The controversy began over the weekend. Donald Trump cancelled US aid funding to India, around $21 million of it. Apparently, it was used to boost voter turnout. But Trump hinted at something more. He suggested that the previous Biden administration was meddling in India. And cue the politics. The BJP and the Congress party are accusing each other of enabling this. Meanwhile, a new report says that the money was not even allocated to India, that it went to Bangladesh. Now, amid all of this, it's easy to lose track of the real story. The real story is not who benefited from this meddling. That comes later. The real story is who meddled and how. First, some basic facts. Election interference is not earth-shattering anymore. Unfortunately, it's commonplace, and a big reason for that is the internet. With one click, you can create an army of propaganda bots, you can unleash them on social media, you can spread fake news against the party you dislike, and a lot of countries do it. But one country specializes in it, and that is the United States of America. In the past, they would get their hands dirty, the likes of CIA would lead interference operations abroad. Nowadays, it's more tacit. The US has been accused of creating a web of meddling agencies. These can be rights organizations, or media groups, or think tanks, or research organizations. These agencies push reports against certain countries. And who funds them? In a lot of cases, it is USAID, that is America's premier aid-giving agency. It's the same one that Trump is now gutting. Now, USAID is linked to many foundations and organizations. Reports say among them is the Henry Luce Foundation. Henry Luce was an American media mogul. He founded the Time and Fortune magazines. The foundation itself funds a lot of programs, and some of them do look dubious. Like $385,000 to Sciences Po American University. To do what? To publish a report named Indian Muslims at a Time of Hindu Majoritarianism. This grant was given in March 2020. Here's another one, $360,000 to Human Rights Watch. Again, what for? For a report titled Countering Religious Violence in Myanmar, Indonesia and India. This one too was given in 2020. There's a lot of overlap in these organizations, and I'll give you one example. John Julian Amre is a member of the Henry Luce Foundation. He's also the CEO of CSIS, which is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And guess who gave $7 million to CSIS? USAID. Another example is Terence Adamson. He is on the board of the Henry Luce Foundation. He is also linked to another group called the ATF, the Asia Foundation. And USAID gave them $240 million. I've got one more example. This one involves the Open Society Foundations, the one run by George Soros and his family. Among the many OSF fellows is Arunima Bhargav. She also served as chair of the US Commission on Religious Freedom, the same commission that has been blacklisting India since 2020. Now, do you see the trend here? There is clearly an elaborate web. The same set of people, the same set of talking points, all of it connected to US government agencies and USAID. Their game plan is clear. Use so-called research papers or articles, undermine the legitimacy of India's democratic process, and question India's secular fabric. This seems to be the American playbook. But it's not just the Americans. Even China has allegedly tried to meddle. Last year, Microsoft published a report. They said China would likely use AI to interfere in India's elections. So meddling is certainly happening. Maybe the effect is too small to see it, or maybe they have hidden their tracks well. Either way, we need to fight it. And don't expect Donald Trump to do it for you. He doesn't care about India's elections. He's doing it for his own politics. He's doing it to pin foreign meddling charges on Joe Biden. So the action must be taken at home. Political parties in India need to change their approach to election meddling. The question should not be who benefited. The question today should be, who did it and how do we stop it? Yesterday was an emotional day in Israel. The country received the remains of hostages taken on October 7th, and it included two young boys, Ariel and Kafir Bibas. Their mother's body was also supposed to be returned. Instead, Hamas sent the body of a Gazan woman. It became a new flashpoint in the conflict. Benjamin Netanyahu is promising to make Hamas pay for it. He says it's a violation of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, Hamas says the mother was killed in an Israeli airstrike and that her body got mixed up under the rubble. Will this episode reignite the fighting? What is the story of the Bibas family? Our next report tells you.
Israeli flags flutter beside a road in Tel Aviv. A sizable crowd has gathered on both sides of it. Most people seem to be fighting tears as they watch on. A couple of vans zoom by, heading to the nearby forensic center. Inside them are bodies of Israeli hostages, the youngest of them, taken away in October 2023. Just hours ago, these remains were in Gaza. Under last month's ceasefire deal, they were to be handed over to Israel. It happened here, in Khan Yunis. Don't be fooled by the full-sized coffins. Inside two of them were boys, Ariel Bibas, who would have been 5 years old, and Kfir Bibas, who would have been 2. Their mother, Shiri Bibas, was to be in the other coffin, but as it turned out, it wasn't her remains.
These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice.
The Bybus family lived in Neouts, a settlement in southern Israel. They were taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th. The father, Yarden, was returned this month. But when the rest of the family wasn't, it was clear what had happened. Hamas says the mother and sons were killed in an Israeli airstrike, that the mother's remains got mixed under the rubble. But Israel disputes this. They claim Hamas men killed the boys with their bare hands. In Israel, the Bybus boys had become a symbol of Hamas brutality. Now that their mother's body is missing, the grief will only grow.
It really hurts because once they are dead, and we really hope that they won't be dead, that they will come back. And now it's like they make a joke of us. This is what I feel, because the children are true, they are the children, and the mother, they just sent a body, and it's so painful.
Netanyahu claims he will avenge the Bybus family, but the family is blaming him. They say Netanyahu abandoned them on October 7th and again in Gaza, while they were in captivity. So the family is asking him to apologize. But the Prime Minister is thinking politics. With Donald Trump on his side, Netanyahu is spoiling for confrontation. He is supporting the plan to evacuate Gazans, to turn the Strip into a resort town. But Arab nations have vowed to fight it. They are meeting today in the Saudi capital of Riyadh. The main agenda is to oppose Trump's plan to reaffirm their commitment to the two-state solution. As the politics plays out, grief will take a backseat. But the Bybus family's story should serve as a reminder, not just of the brutality of October 7th, but of how fragile this ceasefire is.
Germany is heading to polls. They will vote on Sunday, February 23rd. This election was supposed to happen by the end of this year, but then the government collapsed, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz had to call a snap election. Now he's fighting for survival. So who are the key contenders in this fight? What is on the agenda? And why is Germany's Gen Z shifting right? Let's break it down. First, the key contenders. Now, Germany's politics is heavily color-coded. Every party has a color, and it's what they're associated with, their color. It's also how coalitions are named. We start with the Social Democratic Party, which is led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz. This is the party in power. Its symbol is a red rose. So it is associated with the color red. And this is Germany's oldest party, known for its centrist politics. In the current government, it was in a coalition with two other parties. One is the Free Democratic Party, which is pro-business. It favors a small government. It is associated with the color yellow. The second is the Greens. Once an anti-establishment party, it emerged from environment movements, and now it's a mainstream force in Germany. So these three parties, coalition partners, red, yellow, and green, they form the current German government. Hence, it was called the Traffic Light Coalition. But for Scholz's government, that light has just turned red because another party is surging in polls. It is the Christian Democratic Union. This is Germany's main conservative party. It was once led by Angela Merkel. Now it is headed by a man called Friedrich Merz. He's 69 years old. He wants to restrict immigration, and he wants to bring back nuclear energy.
I am not looking for any other majorities in this German Bundestag than those in the democratic center of our parliament. And if there were such a majority here today, if there has been such a majority here today, then I regret it.
This party, the CDU, is leading the polls with 29% voter support, but it won't be enough, 29%, which brings us to the wild card in this election and probably the kingmaker. The party called AfD, the Alternative for Germany Party. It is called a far-right party. It was set up in 2013, as a Eurosceptic fringe organization, but it soon became popular because of its anti-immigration agenda. Now, the AfD has a pro-Moscow stance. It supports Donald Trump. It doubts climate change, and one of its biggest backers is Elon Musk. Leading this party is Alice Weidel. She is 46 years old. She's said to have 21% voter support, which is not enough to win, but surely enough to decide the winner.
Burqas, headscarf girls and knife men on state benefits and other good-for-nothings will not secure our prosperity, economic growth and, above all, the welfare state.
It's okay to be proud to be German. This is a very important principle. And fight for a great future for Germany. Fight for a great future for Germany. Go, go, go. Convince your friends, convince everyone. Let's go.
So these are the big faces. Now let's talk about the key issues driving this election. The first and the foremost is immigration. Last year, Germany witnessed many fatal attacks, deadly stabbings and car ramming incidents, and most of these were blamed on immigrants. So there are calls for a crackdown. Merz has promised it, so has Alice Weidel. Chancellor Scholz has been softer on it, but now his party too wants tighter border controls. The second big issue is the economy. Germany is Europe's largest economy. It is also the most populous nation, but the country remains mired in recession. Growth is slow, investment is lackluster. So all parties have plans for this. The Conservatives want corporate tax cuts. Scholz wants income tax cuts. There's also talk of an inheritance tax.
We represent, in terms of economic weight, 27% of the Eurozone, together with France almost 50%, and that's a lot. And it's clear that if it doesn't work well in those two countries, if they don't work well together, it means that the European Union can't really move forward.
So economy is quite a big issue, which brings us to the last big one, the Ukraine war. Germany is Kyiv's second biggest military backer after the United States. All mainstream parties support Ukraine. Merz wants to send Kyiv the Taurus missiles. These are capable of hitting Russian territory. Scholz is more cautious. He doesn't want to do anything that will antagonize Moscow further. Meanwhile, the AfD has a different stance. It wants to stop all arms deliveries. So immigration, economy, Ukraine. These are the issues that will decide the polls. And the big vote bank is Gen Z. During the last election in 2021, the Greens were the top party for the youth. This time things are a little different. Gen Z is backing the Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, followed by the AfD party. So what explains this pivot to the right? It's TikTok. AfD is big on the app. It uses TikTok to rally support, and that explains its growing popularity among the youth. Plus, there's immigration. You see, most of the AfD support comes from East Germany. And this region has long been homogeneous. They've not seen a lot of diversity. But the growing number of immigrants is changing that, and the locals seem to be uncomfortable with it, which is why the youth are backing the party that opposes immigration. But here's something I must add. Polls say that 30% of German voters are undecided. Most of them are the youth. Unlike their parents, they don't have solid party loyalties.
Well, things have been a bit chaotic with our government recently, and I think that maybe with how should I put it, no more grand coalition, the party, that party, that party, but maybe one or two who then form the government.
So right now, Germany is at a crossroads. This election could determine its future. Will the voters stick with the centrists? Will the Conservatives take back power? And what role will the far right play in shaping Germany's future? This Sunday, the world will be watching. Our next story comes from the smallest country in the world, the Vatican. Pope Francis is currently hospitalized. He's suffering from double pneumonia. Since the hospitalization, his health has deteriorated drastically. Even the Pope thinks that he may not make it. So he's mulling a drastic move, a resignation. Although he won't be the first pontiff to do this, the first one to resign. But who will replace him? That is the big question. Meanwhile, the Vatican is already preparing for the worst-case scenario. There are rehearsals underway for a papal funeral. Our next report brings you all the details.
This is the world's smallest army, the Vatican Swiss Guards. They have one sole mission, to protect the Pope. But this week, these guards are secretly rehearsing for something else, a funeral. Pope Francis is in the hospital. The pontiff is 88 years old. He was suffering from bronchitis. Since then, he's developed pneumonia. He also has a respiratory infection, so the Vatican is worried. Reports suggest the Swiss Guard is rehearsing and preparing for a papal funeral. Why? Because even the Pope thinks he may not make it, that he will not survive this hospital visit. So clearly, the Vatican is preparing for the worst-case scenario. However, that hasn't stopped their work. Business goes on as usual, and for now, the Pope is taking decisions and calls. But he's also floated another idea, resignation. He could quit if he is impaired. Now, this wouldn't be a first. Popes have resigned in the past. In recent centuries, only one pontiff has done it. It is Pope Benedict XVI. He stepped down in 2013 due to concerns about his health. He was the first Holy See to resign in 600 years. It paved the way for Pope Francis's election. Pope Francis, in fact, already wrote a resignation letter. It was in 2013, shortly after he was chosen. He was worried about his health then. His concerns remain the same. Now a pope has to resign via a letter. It's submitted to the College of Cardinals. However, there's no need for approvals. Under the canon law, it should be done by free will. If they fear any fraud, the resignation can be rejected. Which brings us to the process of selecting a new pope. It's done in a private gathering at the Vatican called the conclave. Technically, any Roman Catholic male can be elected pope. But who elects this pope? It's the College of Cardinals. When a new pope has to be selected, every cardinal under the age of 80 travels to Rome. Once they are in the Vatican, the process starts. The voting happens at the Sistine Chapel. Each of them is given a ballot. They must write the name of the candidate they want to choose. However, they can't elect themselves. If a cardinal receives over 2/3 of the vote, he becomes the pope. If no one gets the vote, it continues for days until and unless a new pope is chosen. Now, the process itself is very secretive. Voting happens behind closed doors. The cardinals can't talk to anyone but themselves. There are no phones or cameras. No one is allowed inside the Sistine Chapel. But once a vote is done, ballots are burned with a chemical. If the smoke coming out is white, a new pope is chosen. If the smoke is black, that means no decision has been reached and the voting continues. The smoke is for the world to remain updated with the proceedings behind the closed doors. So as the Vatican prepares for every possibility, a recovery, a resignation or a final farewell, one thing is certain. Whether in life or in death, the legacy of Pope Francis will be written soon, and the future of the Church may be about to change.
Now let's talk about Elon Musk. These days he's making headlines for Doge. That's all that everyone can talk about. But Musk, the businessman, has not taken a back seat. His satellite internet company Starlink is expanding. It is looking to roll out business in India. Starlink has checked most of the regulatory boxes. The process is far from complete though, but reports say that Starlink has submitted all the required details. Now the government is reviewing their application. Once the review is done and Starlink has satisfied all requirements, the company may get the go-ahead, a license to operate in India. This comes a week after Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C. During the trip, he met Elon Musk. We don't have the details of the conversation, but we can see the fallout. In the past few days, there's been a flurry of activity related to Musk's companies. First, Tesla took action. Tesla is Musk's electric car company. It is hiring personnel in India, at least 13 of them. Some reports say Tesla is also looking for showroom space. And this has obviously fueled speculation that Tesla may be entering the Indian market finally. And now there's buzz around Starlink. It is an internet service provider. Instead of using cables, it works on satellites. Starlink has thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth. It works almost everywhere. All you need is a clear view of the sky. Users connect to Starlink through a special dish. It works like satellite TV, but for the internet. So it sends and receives signals from Starlink satellites in space. And here's what you have to do. First, you set up the dish. Then you connect your devices to it, and then you can be online. Starlink promises high internet speed, somewhere between 20 to 220 Mbps, which means potentially Starlink can download a song within seconds, a movie in around 5 minutes, and a large video game in about an hour. So it's basically promising the internet superhighway. The question is, does India even need it? Is India's existing digital infrastructure not good enough? Let's take a closer look. First, what problem is Starlink trying to solve with satellite internet? And who really needs it? Supporters of Starlink say that it will expand access, especially to remote areas where traditional cables and wires cannot reach. And to some extent, they are right. Starlink can provide instant connectivity to isolated regions. But at what cost? By some estimates, Starlink could cost over 100,000 rupees in the first year. That's 1 lakh rupees for 1 unit. That's more than $1,000. And this is just the cost of Starlink equipment. It is for the dish that you'll have to install to connect to the internet. Then there's a service cost, the monthly internet bill to use Starlink. And how much will that be? Around 7,000 rupees, which is $80, 80. Let's compare this to the average cost of internet in India today. It is among the cheapest in the world. In India, 1 GB of data costs 26 cents. Compare this to the US, where customers pay $12 for 1 GB of data. In India, it's 26 cents. In the US, it's $12. This is what makes India's internet ecosystem unique, the low cost of access. This year, India's internet user base is projected to cross 900 million. And 55% of this user base is in rural India. So even without Starlink, Indian masses are getting online. That said, the technology does have its benefits. Satellite internet can be a lifeline during natural disasters when a country's digital infra has been hit. It can help fight wars in difficult terrain. Just ask Ukraine, it has relied on Starlink to conduct military operations. So India should not block this technology. Instead, India should encourage homegrown players. And thankfully, Indian telecom companies are not sitting on the sidelines. They're planning their own satellite internet products. So Starlink will face tough competition if and when it comes to India. Local players understand the Indian market better. Starlink will have to fight for market share. Elon Musk's name may not be enough. To survive in India, they need a competitive strategy. Now let's turn our attention to Africa, specifically to the Ivory Coast in the west. This country is home to about 29 million people, along with French military bases. But that last part is set to change because the French troops are leaving. Paris has lost its last military base in the country and by proxy, another stronghold in the region. After Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad and Senegal, the French military has been forced to leave the Ivory Coast. What does that mean for France's African ambitions? And why has the Ivory Coast expelled French troops? Our next report tells you.
This is Côte d'Ivoire, or in English, the Ivory Coast. This West African country is a former French colony. It became independent in the year 1960. This year, it decided to kick out French troops from the country. It told the French forces to withdraw, and now, the Ivory Coast has finally done it. It has officially taken control of the last remaining French military base in the country, and shut the door on French military ambitions in Africa. But the Ivory Coast insists that it remains a staunch French ally. While the forces will withdraw, some 80 French servicemen will continue to stay in the country. Why? To apparently advise and train the Ivorian military.
France is transforming its presence. France is not disappearing. 80 French soldiers, forming the core of an inter-army military detachment, will become, in a way, part of the French military for disciplinary needs and for training purposes.
This act marks a new stage in the relationship of friendship and strategic cooperation between our two nations.
But this is a major blow to Paris. It has lost yet another stronghold in Africa. After Mali in 2022, Niger and Burkina Faso in 2023, Chad in 2024, Ivory Coast, now, in 2025, and Senegal by the end of this year. Now, French military presence in Africa will soon be limited to only 2 countries. In Djibouti with 1,500 troops, and Gabon with 350 soldiers. France has been asked to leave more than 70% of African countries where it had troop presence, which is a far cry from its troop stationed since colonial times. You see, France was once a major colonial power. It maintained stronghold in West and Central Africa. It controlled several countries in the region, and by proxy, millions of African people. But during the 1960s the empire broke up. Though, France maintained its presence in the region by maintaining control of the military bases. For decades, it stationed thousands of troops across the region, but a few years ago a broader change erupted and transformed the region's engagement with Paris. It started when 3 countries were hit by military coups: Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. As a string of governments toppled, ruling military juntas replaced them and they started kicking the French troops away. Soon, other former French colonies joined in, with sharp criticism of France. Partially, for political gains, the Ivory Coast is heading to polls this year, in October. While there is no formal decision yet, their president, Alassane Ouattara, has signaled that he wants to run again, for a 4th term. So he may be leaning into the anti-France sentiment to rally public opinion. But either way, this is a setback for Paris, which has, for decades now, maintained military bases across Africa, to continue its influence over the region. So looks like Paris' colonial pet project in Africa is finally dismantling.
Our last story tonight is about a 4-year-old child, a young scion, a budding nasal digger, and apparently the protege of the world's richest man. I'm talking about X Ash A12, who's simply called X. He is tech billionaire Elon Musk's child, the 7th of his 12 children, and has been to places many will never see, including the Oval Office. Last week, Trump's close advisor Elon Musk joined him for a press conference at the White House. While Musk talked about democracy, his son X was mostly perched on his shoulders. And when he stood on his feet, X wandered around, fidgeted, and mimicked his father.
Well, if you don't have a feedback loop, okay, X, we would have to, if you, it's all right. So, tell you, gravitas can be difficult sometimes.
Well, speaking of gravitas, X appeared to tell the president of the nation, "I want you to shush your mouth." And at one point, X picked his nose, then wiped it on the desk, US President Donald Trump's desk, what's called the Resolute desk. It has been used by 8 US presidents in the Oval Office. Now, it's very normal for a child to pick his nose. What's not so normal is for him to be around a president while doing it. And not just any president, a known germaphobe. So it's not surprising that Trump has sent the desk away and replaced it with another one. But the desk debacle aside, ever since Musk started leading DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, he has made frequent appearances with mini Musks. We saw this last week when he met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington. 3 of Musk's children were at the meeting. We saw this yesterday as well when he met Argentinian President Javier Milei. While Musk played with Milei's gift, a chainsaw, one of his children clung to his leg. Now that does not look like the safest bring your child to work day. But that's not the only reason why Musk's parenting is dividing public opinion. So-called Muskies are fans of the fun dad behavior. But critics call it, and I'm quoting, an exploitative PR strategy. Now here is some context. In the past, Musk has called X an emotional support human and a cuteness prop. These were his words. X's mother, Grimes, has repeatedly and publicly said that her young son, and I'm quoting, should not be in public like this. That's what the mother has said. Yesterday, she posted on the platform X, urging Musk, and I'm quoting again, to respond about their child's medical crisis. Also, Musk's transgender daughter from his first wife has cut ties with him after calling him an absent and cruel father. So this turn of events is surprising, and experts have thoughts about these fun dad appearances. They say it is to make Musk seem more personable. And this is a transparent, popular strategy. Like in 2017, when former internet darling Justin Trudeau brought his 3-year-old son to office and somehow found time for a game of hide and seek between all the work. Now, this is obviously not to say that political leaders or people in general should not bring their children to work, or that everyone who does it sets up a deliberate PR trap. When leaders parent in public, they do something very powerful. Like in 2018, when Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, became the first world leader to attend the United Nations General Assembly meeting with her baby. Likewise, in 2017, when an Australian senator held her child as she voted on a resolution in Parliament. And while this is arguably a privilege reserved for a few people at the top, recently we saw a similar resolve reflect in a female cop here in India. She carried her baby while patrolling a train station during a crisis situation. These cases have made headlines the world over. They have sent a powerful message, and there is no denying this. Our world would be a much nicer place if this were the norm instead of the exception. Because there are days when the nanny needs an off, when the school is suddenly cancelled, when your child is not feeling well, when you don't have the option to work from home. Because yes, it does take a village to raise a child, but in the modern society, these villages have disappeared for most people. And yes, parents increasingly have the right to bring their children to work. Some countries, in fact, have legislation for it. Some nations mandate company benefits. Like in India, where nearly 70% companies offer daycare. Or in the US, where about 56% companies are beefing up such benefits. The progress is slow, but the world is increasingly normalizing bringing children to work. What doesn't help this cause is when leaders or pseudo-political leaders do this to earn brownie points. That's when bringing your child to work does not do much to break down barriers, and it definitely does not help anyone win the Father of the Year title. Here in India, political symbols are quite common and quite powerful too. Parties and leaders are often associated with these symbols. It looks like it's catching on in the West too. And the symbol is a chainsaw. It was first popularized by Argentina's President Javier Milei. Chainsaw equals cuts in public funding. That is the message here. And yesterday, Milei gifted the symbol of austerity to Elon Musk. I mean, it's a perfect gift for Musk. Nothing screams austerity like a man worth $400 billion. Take a look.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau taunts the US after Canada's ice hockey win. A humanoid robot walks a robotic dog at the Global Developer Conference. And on Earth, you may put on your pants one leg at a time, but in space, astronauts do it a little different. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1972, US President Richard Nixon embarked on a historic 8-day visit to China. Nixon was the first sitting US president to visit mainland China. His visit ended decades of Sino-US enmity. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, and we're live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines.